What are your memories of first initial memories of theatre?
The green rooms. I don't have any memories of what, say, the Bhulabhai Desai auditorium looked like from the outside, or Patkar, or Jai Hind. All these places, I don't know what the theatres looked like from the outside, but I know all the green rooms because I used to go with my mom when she was performing or rehearsing and just hang around backstage all the time. So, being part of a rehearsal is something that I don't remember a time when I didn't know what a theatre rehearsal was like. So, my introduction to the theatre was from the inside.
Okay.
I, in fact, don't remember too many of the plays that I saw as a child from the outside. I don't remember too much about the play, I suppose, when I was very young. Because my mother, Ratna Pathak, she was an actress. My aunt, Tarla Mehta, she was a theatre actress. They both used to do Gujarati plays in those days mainly. And Shanta Gandhi, my other aunt, used to do a very different kind of theatre in Delhi because she taught at the National School of Drama and used to write and produce plays there. So all three kinds of theatre I was fortunate to have seen right from the time when I was a kid. So I really don't have any memory of going to the theatre for the first time or being surprised by what I saw. It just happened to be around all the time, so there was no sense of the magic that people talk about. But I definitely had a very strong sense of the magic that people who participate in the theatre experience. The Bhulabhai, I again don't remember seeing a play there, but I remember being there many times as a child. I think I must have been about 8 or 10 at that time, because Dubey used to do some rehearsals there, and my mum was acting in a play, I can't remember what, for which there would be rehearsals at the Bhulabhai Institute, and there were all kinds of things that used to happen, poetry reading and somebody talking about something. So I think I was part of that also, because I have vague memories of all these things. But what I do have a very strong memory of was the kind of space it was. It was very informal. There was no real sense of distance between audience and performer. There was a kind of a stage, if I am not mistaken, but the distinction between audience and performer was minuscule compared to, say, a theatre like Tejpal, where the distance was very clearly demarcated. And that was unusual about Bhulabhai. And Bhulabhai was not a commercial venture. It was a venture that sort of focused on experimentation, on understanding, on education in the theatre as part of its thrust. So a variety of performances took place, but they were never commercial ventures. There wasn't a play that ran for many days, for example. It would be a one-off. There'd be a poetry reading, there'd be some dance, there'd be some somebody talking about painting. I think there was even a kind of a workshop or a conference that was held at some point, theatre related, for which also I landed up. I have no details, but I definitely have a sense of that space and the kind of people that came to that space. It was very distinctly different from the kind of people that came to, say, the Gujarati commercial theatre spaces. The actors, the directors, everyone was a different kind of person. They seemed to be involved in different kinds of ideas and experiments, rather than putting together a play that would run for X number of shows and make a lot of money, which was the general trend in the Gujarati theatre that I was exposed to as a young girl. And then, of course, there was Satyadev Dubey, who changed everything, for me at least. And through Dubey, again, my mother was my conduit, Tarla, my aunt, was my first conduit to Dubey, because she acted with him in a couple of productions. Pagla Ghoda and Yayati were the two that I remember straight off. And those were, again, productions that were so different. approach to what was being done was distinctly different. And even I, as an 8-year-old, could make out that this kind of theatre is significantly different from what I am seeing in the regular commercial Gujarati space. I had very little exposure to the kind of plays that were done in the English language at that time. Marathi, one did get taken to, but only special moments like, Patatachi Tsar, for example. That I remember going to see with my mom. But then when I grew up, Avishkar and the work that they were doing became extremely visible. And the work that Dr. Lagu was doing, for example. Again, it was peripheral. My understanding or exposure to that was very peripheral. But I remember seeing Ajab Nyaya Vartulyacha, for example, and being completely blown away by that. Or Ti Phularani. And there was a Gujarati production running at the same time, or about the same time. And, I could immediately tell the difference between the two. And a difference in intention as well as in execution. So that, I think, was what was very special about Bombay. That you had a variety of theatre spaces, a variety of theatre productions, and a variety of approaches to theatre, all existent, all sharing off each other, and all sort of curious and involved in each other's work. There wasn't very much actual crossing over of actors. In fact, people tended to be very, very possessive about actors. Dubey in particular, he was notorious about it, for it. But yet, the crossing over did take place. And I think both fed each other.
When you talk about this informal space at Bulabai, you're talking about the way the plays were staged, their distance. Can you describe, do you remember in more detail was it an outdoor space? What is it? Do you remember any of that?
I mean, what I remember of it, open terrace kind of a space. And then there was a space which was somewhat covered. I don't remember if it was air conditioned. So I can't remember, what a play sounded like there, for example. But there was a kind of a long hall-like space, and it was horizontal, long space. And there were a series of levels, if I'm not mistaken. And so there was no real acting space defined. So you could use that space whichever way you wanted. But most people did tend to perform on the uppermost space. I think I saw a production by Alka also there. I think he did a Man Does Not Die by Bread Alone. Could be. Now, I'm not sure whether this is something I've heard of or which I actually witnessed. But I do have memories of Alka doing something there. And the NST brought a theatre festival kind of thing, a tour that NST had organized with about 6 or 7 of their productions. This would be around 72, 73. I think there was something done at that point in Bulabai also, but I don't remember if I saw it. And that was quite an unusual experience for me. I think that is what crystallized my desire to be in the theatre, seeing that performance. It was very different from what we had seen in Bombay. There was a lot of music, there was a great sophistication of presentation in terms of lights and sets and sound and things like that. That was really extraordinary. And there were actors that could sing and dance and act and do all kinds of things. A few rehearsals of a play called Meera, if I'm not mistaken. This was a play written by Gurcharan Singh, maybe? I think so. And Alka did it. And there was a lot of, there was all kinds of things. They were, first time I think when I saw projection, video projection, not live video projection, but he had used slides. And that was the first time I saw something like that in that production. There was music. I think Neela Bhagwat was responsible for the music. So there was Neela singing. I don't remember again whether that was live or not. But I think they used to rehearse there at Bulabai. So maybe I went along for rehearsals there. That's my memory of Bulabai.
So you said you have memories of Walcham Terrace too. You have been there. So can we
rehearsals at Walcham Terrace and rehearsals of Hayavadan.
Oh, okay.
Which I think is the most magical production I have ever seen. I mean, I was just enthralled by the whole process. Dubey with his incredible rehearsal style, which was 60% shouting and 40% really intense, very, very detailed work on the way in which people spoke. I think that again was my first exposure to the idea of how speech can come alive on stage and how performances are created. And I remember being at a rehearsal where the dolls were being rehearsed. The two puppets, and Kalpana Lajmi and Priya Tendulkar were doing the puppets. And the rehearsal of how the puppets should move, how they become limp, what they do, and of course Dubey having hysterics about how, you know, what he wanted was not coming across. But I remember being completely blown away by the way in which Dubey rehearsed. I remember being there for rehearsals of Yayati also, but then I was too small, so I don't think anything made any sense to me except the fact that Dubey shouted a lot. But apart from that, I don't remember. And I remember discussions of costume for Yayati. कि किस तरह के costume बनेंगे. So maybe that was my first introduction to the idea of what costumes contribute to a play. My lifelong interest in costume was probably spawned as part of the Yayati rehearsals. But the rehearsals of Hayavadan at Walchand Terrace, they were extraordinary also because they showed me that this business of putting a play together is extremely hard work, but that hard work is extremely pleasurable, and that, I think, again is something that has lasted me for a lifetime. The process of enjoying the enjoyment that Dubey derived in the process was always greater than the enjoyment that everyone experienced during performance. And I remember my mother rehearsing for the Kalima, and I remember her creating her costume out of little bits and pieces, and how it worked. I mean, how magically she transformed into another personality altogether. And I thought it was greatly liberating for Ma as well, because by then she was getting a bit bogged down with this whole Gujarati theatre business, and that is a killing experience, I can promise you. Any amount of time, if you've done more than one or two typical Gujarati commercial plays, then it just becomes unbearable. Again, I realized that very soon, as a young kid, that this is not what I want to do. This just does not seem right. And I think it was because there was Dubey that I could juxtapose it with. And I think for her, Kalima was a throwback to the earlier times when she used to do Rangli, for example, in the Bhavai inspired plays that they did. And the kind of excitement that she brought to the children's theatre that she did. She did a couple of plays with a little group called Balodyan. There was a little children's recreational group run by my uncle, my mama, who had a little extra space in his compound. So he ran a children's club there. And one of the things that the children's club did was plays. And Ma directed a couple of plays. That was, you know, I could see the kind of enthusiasm and vigor that she brought to that kind of work. Of course, there were comedies, you know, Mithya Abhiman, for example, play, kind of, I can't even remember who wrote Mithya Abhiman. Shit, I've forgotten. But
I've acted in her production of Mithya Abhiman in school.
Yes, that's
school.
right. That's how we met.
That's how we met.
That's right. Yeah, Man went and did Mithya Abhiman there. And somebody did Bhagvat Ajukiyam. So it was that kind of stuff. But the excitement that she brought to that work, I found again when she was doing Hayavadan and Kalima in Hayavadan.
So you remember the space and the performance area?
No, there was no performance area. It was just one large space, very kindly donated by Vinod Doshi or Ajit Gulabchand?
Vinod.
Vinod Doshi. And Vinod would come and sit and listen. Sarubin would come and sit and listen. And a whole variety of people would come and sit and listen. And most days after rehearsal, there would be one major argument about something or the other. And then that argument would spill over into somebody's house, and it became dinner and just sitting around till late night talking about theatre. Again, something that has been very much a part of my growing up. These post and pre performance sessions in the house where theatre spilled over into our homes, and it was fantastic.
So how did the actors get ready for the performance? Like, was there a green room? Was there a rest room?
No, nothing. I don't even think there was a loo. We had to go somewhere else to use the toilet, I think. Or maybe there was one, I can't even remember. But it was nothing. It was just this large, open room. Again, horizontal. Or at least Dubey used it that way. And, again, that long sense of a theatre with acting space at the far end.
And Walchand was not a
performance space at all.
It was just
a
rehearsal space.
Okay.
Yeah. A lot of the major productions got rehearsed there.
Yeah.
And it was used like almost like a communal kind of gathering space.
Correct.
Apart from rehearsals. So
Correct.
actually, if you remember any of that, that would be just the atmosphere at Walchand.
I think Dubey used to live there also.
Yeah.
So there was one little corner which was very messy and very Dubey. Otherwise it used to be this just a space. Everyone could just come and sit wherever they wanted. And Dubey was remarkably democratic in certain ways. I mean, his word was the final word. There was no doubt about that. Amol had a lot to contribute and say. I remember Amol and Dubey having discussions. I don't think Puri Saab and Sunila participated too much in that. But it was a space where people would hang out. They would come in during rehearsal or after rehearsal, would sit around, would the whole planning of how this is going to be done, where the set is going to come from, or the costumes, all that would happen again post rehearsal. There was Hemant Rege running around with cups of tea, and there was who was that other person? Not Chenoy. The other person who used to always help, who was the sort of backbone of Dubey's production team.
At that time, I wouldn't know.
He was there when you were there also. An elderly-ish man, Savur. There was a Mr. Savur, or some such name like that. Shit, I can't remember. But he was around always, and he was the one who was the person who organized. He was the organizational head, as it were. And Dubey worked very well with people like that. He had trouble with actors who threw their weight around. He had trouble with people who he couldn't get his idea across to easily, because he was very clear in his mind. That I remember about Dubey right from the beginning. That Dubey heard the play as it was going to be performed in his mind way before the play was even, way before he even began rehearsing a play. So there was that sense of concentration on the spoken word, which was very unusual. I don't remember anyone else spending as much time on the way in which things were said and spoken as Dubey did.
Do you think it was Abdul Shakur?
Abdul Shakur, that was the name. Abdul Shakur. Yeah, he travelled with them. I remember going on a tour with them somewhere as well, with Puri Saab singing Babul Mura Sayir and all that on the train. And it was quite fabulous.
So
Hyderabad was a wonderful experience.
So Walchand Terrace is also known for this meeting of greats, the painters and artists from...
That was Bhulabhai.
That was
Walchand is
Bhulabhai.
mostly theatre and sort of centers around Dubey.
Dubey. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
think anyone else rehearsed at Walchand.
Well, I think unfortunately Vinod is not around to confirm this. I had a chat with Sarayu. Not very sure, but one of the things is that perhaps it was given both to Avishkar and to Dubey. But Dubey's work dominated there. Though
Correct.
Arvind and all of them used to hang out.
Oh, absolutely.
But that was
Absolutely.
the phase when he was kind of dominant. So it
I think
became...
No Exit was also rehearsed there,
Possibly.
if I'm not mistaken.
Possibly.
And probably I went in for a couple of rehearsals of that. But again, that's very, very dhundli memory.
Gidhade was done there.
Gidhade was rehearsed there, yes.
Yeah. And I suspect the Gujarati production of Sakharam
Binder was also rehearsed there,
Yeah,
yes. I was very much part of that production because I used to hang around during that rehearsal a lot. It was the Gujarati version of Sakharam Binder was produced by a kind of a cooperative that they were trying to form, which my mother, Tarla Mehta, Giresh Desai and Dubey, they were together. The idea was to do it in a cooperative sense, that all these people would give their labor and their talent to the production, and if any money was made, it would be split. So there was no real producer as such. Gujarati theatre otherwise had a producer who made all the profits. But here was the idea of doing theatre in a cooperative fashion. Of course, it didn't do well at all. The cooperative didn't succeed at all. Everyone fell out, I think, within the first 5 shows of Sakharam. But yes, the rehearsals of Sakharam were also done in Baljan. So it was really a rehearsal space. I don't think there were ever any performances done there. Meera Zogrekar might remember also, because Meera was also part of Dubey's group and she used to act in his plays at that time.
Yes.
So maybe she might have some
She
memories
might
of
have.
Baljan.
Yeah, yeah. Valchand also we've done a very, very lengthy interview with Amol. So he has very clear memories of Valchand.
Yes.
Sulabha,
Yes.
she has very clear, because they were all actually there.
Exactly.
You know, for many of them that was a seminal time actually.
Absolutely.
So Valchand is pretty much clear.
Well documented.
Yeah. I think we can start talking about Chabildas and your first, exposure to Chabildas. It's always an interesting, the description of Chabildas is very dramatic in the way you approached it. So maybe something about that would be interesting.
Sambog se sannyas tak. So maybe that was my first exposure to Chabildas. And
we opened at
Rang
Mandir.
Mandir here.
Yeah, and then we moved.
Went to Chabildas, yeah. Before that, I don't think I've done anything in Chabildas. And I don't even remember if the plays that I saw in Chabildas were before or after I started acting there. But again, I can't help it. My memories are of the green room. That's or what could possibly be called a green room. There was nothing like that in Chabildas. There were a couple of benches with a very dirty mirror strung up somewhere at the back. I don't even know if it was an enclosed space. I know that the girls had to go to the loo, very smelly, dirty loo, to change. And that was hard to do for Sambog se sannyas tak because they were complicated costumes. So I think we had rigged up a little black cubicle at the back so that we could change there. And there were so many of us in that production, and there were not so many people in the audience. I remember we did shows to very, very small audiences. But the other memory of Chabildas is the entrance to Chabildas. That very dark little municipal school kind of entrance and the staircase going up. And the other thing was the fact that the whole locality seemed to be part of the, the venue, as it were, because there was a long balcony which ran alongside the acting area in Chabildas and the performance area. So performance area mein to wo band kar dete the. There were black curtains that were drawn. We couldn't shut the windows and the doors because it would get too hot. So there were black curtains that were drawn on where the audience sat across these the doors. But in the acting side, you exited off stage and went into this balcony, and you could check out whatever was running on television that day. So I remember there were shows when we were performing and when the Wimbledon was going on at the same time. So between acts, everyone would stand around between entries and you try and peer into the neighbor's thing to figure out कौन किसके साथ खेल रहा है और कहाँ तक मैच पहुँची. And everyone's cooking, you could smell in Chabildas. So if you were hungry, you knew who was cooking what, and you were desperate to go and share that. Everyone's television viewing was known to us, their tastes, their timings, because that was what was very much heard and seen on stage as well as in that lovely balcony. There was a lighting board which I wish we could have preserved for posterity because it was incredible. To start with, of course, there were those double dimmers, and then they moved on to those ones with the levers like this. But it was rigged up by somebody, I don't know who, and it was really put together. There was no brand name of any kind. But that really was Chabildas, you know, this ability to improvise in everything. Lights were minimal. So what do you do with those minimal lights? How do you produce what you want to? Sets were practically non-existent. Don Juan in Hell, that had a set. I mean, it had to be carried up, and that was quite a job carrying up that set. In fact, the first time Sitaram constructed it there probably, and then it had to be carried down. So I remember that being quite an issue because it was a complicated bit of stuff. And the lighting also was kind of complicated in Don Juan. But before that, I think Sambhog and all had very basic stuff. Then we did Waiting for Godot there, which was again extremely basic. And The Lesson, a production that was directed by Ketan Mehta, in which myself and Nasir and a variety of people did the maid. So I don't remember who was doing the maid. I think Supriya did the maid. Suhasini Mule did the maid. Sanobar did the maid.
One day she got arrested in a political protest and couldn't
show up for the show. That's right.
But that was a Prithvi show.
And then Asha Kasbekar did the maid. All kinds of people were there. In Chabildas, of course, there was a designated performance area. There was no stage. It was all on the ground. So you did everything, you know, falling. And Dubey loved actresses writhing on the floor. So all of us had to writhe on that bloody, uncomfortable, really rough Kota stone floor, you know. Everyone was writhing away out there. And in a play like Sambhog, there was a lot of rushing around and falling and stuff like that. So everything had to be done on that raw floor. The audience had some kind of a raked system there. There were a series of levels so that the audience had some kind of visibility. Sound was pretty poor, I would imagine, because everything around was in theatre along with you. And lights were very basic. You know, those lovely old halogen floods, the big dabbas, and very, very basic stuff. Everything was very basic. The sets used to be constructed there, if there were any. Otherwise, it was just the black wings and the black backdrop. And that freed us in many ways to focus on what we were doing and the kind of plays we were doing and how we were doing them, rather than how we were appearing to the audience. That always was a secondary notion. The first thing was what were we doing and how much are we enjoying and how good can we be. I remember seeing a lot of things at Chabildas. I remember seeing Ala Adana Sagada and being completely blown away by the energy of all the actors, particularly Nana Patekar was extraordinary in that. And so was everyone else. It was just quite...
Julus used the space differently, you remember? They used it differently.
They used it differently. They were in the middle. There was... UB used to do it usually at the far end, and then the audience would sit like that. And Julus broke that up completely. So Julus was in the round and the audience sat around them.
Okay.
So that was quite...
And this is Amol Palekar.
This is Amol Palekar's Julus. Yes. And then there was... Dubai used it in various ways. I think Gidhare was done there. Baby was done there.
Baby was not Gidhare. Baby was done there. But Baby was interesting because he used projections, so there were layers.
Yes, there were, yes.
You know, there used to be, there was a black screen, and then when you lit up at the back, the cinema screen would appear. So Baby was quite complex.
Quite complex.
Quite complex. Even his sofa cum bed.
Yes,
you know,
sofa cum bed, that's whole, right.
Slides
that's
and...
right.
Yeah.
देवयानी का कहना है कहाँ किया था उसने?
वहाँ पे किया था, तेजपाल में भी किया था.
तेजपाल में किया था,
definitely.
वहाँ पे भी किया था.
बिल्कुल.
That was quite an extraordinary production also.
So what did, at that time, what did Chabildas mean to the theatre world? That's really a pretty key idea.
See, what I can remember is that there have been two kinds of theatre existing in Bombay forever. There was the commercial theatre, whether Gujarati or Marathi. Those were the guys who were doing plays essentially to make money out of them. And because their focus was so sharply on making money, they spent absolutely no time and energy on anything. There was no sophistication of production, there was no sophistication of ideas, there was no sophistication of performance. It was crude in all three respects. When I say sophistication of production, there were some plays that had, planes landing and a train passing and all that kind of tamjam. But quite honestly, it was done in an extremely crude manner. And without any real reference or need. It was just, the audience needed to be dazzled in some form. And then there was the Dubai Vijaya Mehta, early Vijaya Mehta, but definitely the Avishkar and Arvind and Sulabha's kind of work. That was a very strong counterpoint for all of us growing up at that time. And we were clearly much more, I was clearly much more drawn towards this kind of work. I don't ever remember feeling that I wanted to be part of the kind of work that was being done in the commercial theatre. But definitely this was very, very exciting. And it was the only space that everyone could afford. It literally was our only hope. If you were a young group that didn't have money but had ideas, where could you go? There was nowhere to go. So Chabildas was your only space, our only space. The Marathi theatre people had some other options. They did have some forays into various more traditional kind of Marathi spaces, but we didn't. The Hindi and English, whatever nascent work we were doing, we did not have any kind of spaces. So for us, Chabildas was the place that made it possible for us to try out our ideas and to make our mistakes and to grow. It was everything. I mean, if Chabildas hadn't been there, I don't think we could have done the kind of work we were doing.
There are a lot of new groups that emerged in the first 10 years of Chabildas movement. So do you remember their work, the kind of work they did, and what kind of encouragement the space gave to them?
Well, the space was, I don't really remember how much the running of Chabildas and in what way the running of Chabildas was different. I mean, I know that Kakade Kaka was our point person. I mean, he was the man to go to for every kind of issue. And obviously he was in charge of programming everything. But it was really very, very informal. I mean, ये डेट खाली है, कौन कर सकता है, तुम करना चाहते हो, तुम कर लो. There was no real advertising either in those days. So it was the classified ads. So you got the little 10 centimeter or 5 centimeter kind of little thing there. And therefore Dubey started naming all his plays with an A. So if the play didn't have A, Are Sambhog se Sannyas tak, so that you would be among the top in that list. Otherwise you'd be somewhere in the bottom and nobody would even register you. So all these kind of issues were a constant problem for us. And audiences were very, very small. Very, very small. They grew as it went along, but 5, 7, 10 people was quite average. And everyone performed to that kind of audience. There were discussions after performances sometimes. Dubey encouraged that quite a lot. And that was quite exciting.
Discussion with the
audience? With the audience, yes. Yes. Not always, but there used to be such occasions.
Any memory, any anecdote you can remember, any incident, say maybe after Sambhog?
No, it wasn't after Sambhog that. No, I can't remember anything in particular. But I remember being.
No, but you're right, because for instance, we used to do a play called Acha Ek Baar Aur, you remember?
That's right,
And that was a political play.
Correct.
So the CPDR, which was newly formed Human Civil Rights Liberties Group at that time, booked, meaning they bought 40 tickets, which was unbelievable for us. So 40 people from CPDR came and saw the show. And there was a very interesting discussion about the politics of the play and what it represented. It was very basic. I mean, it was black and white type politics, but still, there was an interest. So there was a connect at that time between the political arena, especially the progressive, and theatre. I mean, experimental theatre and progressive politics kind of went hand in hand. That link is broken now, but earlier there was that link.
Yeah. And one just took that link for granted. In fact, now that Sunil is mentioning it, I'm being reminded of that situation, and the fact that we wanted to be part of the theatre. Theatre was meant to be part of the way in which one could respond to and comment on the society around us. It was very much part of that, and people like Tendulkar and Karnad and all who were writing plays of that kind. So theatre, as a reflection of the society of that time, was an absolutely acceptable and very precious idea for all of us. So theatre was not just meant to do, to show off your acting skills. There was always another agenda to it. Sometimes it was more overt and more politically stated, other times it was not. But that theatre must be a reflection and a comment on our society was almost taken for granted by people performing at Chabildas. See, Don Juan in Hell, I think, was probably last time I acted there. We did Waiting for Godot after that also, I'm sure of that. But by then Prithvi had already opened.
Prithvi, Tata, both had opened by then.
NCP Experimental had opened.
No, Tata Theatre.
Tata Theatre.
Show the Don Juan in Hell, the Tata Theatre.
Yes, I know, but that was only Don Juan. That was the only one thing that they were interested in. But the other kind of work that we were doing had no space except for Prithvi and Chabildas still. Yeah. So that definitely were the two spaces that we continued to use. I have to say Prithvi spoiled us, because after the comforts of Prithvi, first of all the blackout, the silence, in Prithvi, that was just totally astounding. To be able to get a serious blackout and to get pin drop silence inside the theatre is quite unusual. Because Chabildas was my only other experience, or Rang Mandir, where we did a few shows with Ipta. So those were noisy venues, and so Prithvi did spoil us, and therefore people stopped coming to Chabildas as Prithvi became more and more accessible.